everybody, and welcome back to Red Hot Talk, episode 17, where photography matters. Here I am Jimmy Chang, a photography filmmaker, and here we got Rod Lawton, photography journalist and editor. And yes, as you see in the title, we are going to talk a little bit about lenses today, and we would like to hear from you, so please do chip in. We're going to keep reminding people, because I know that people do turn up at our live chat randomly, and also probably a little bit later than the actual start time. So maybe we're gonna do by start sharing our experiences. And before we do that, though, Rod Lawton has his beauty filter on, so he looks a lot better today.
Better still, look. No,
Uh,
I think I've got some bandwidth issues at my end, so you've got blurry Rod today, but that could be a good thing. Oh wait, I'm
it's
clearing up.
improving. Look,
Oh,
it's improving.
yeah.
There
Yeah.
you go. Just as you speak. Right, technology, something that is out of our control, unfortunately. So I would like to say a few things about lenses first, and obviously that I have, compared to Rod anyway, I have limited experiences in different lenses. I only experience lenses that I use and own before, or maybe in some cases, obviously reviews. But obviously, a majority of you know that I used to shoot with Canon, so I have experience with Canon lenses, and I have experience with Leica lenses, and now with Micro Four Thirds lenses. But Rod have definitely a lot more experiences and compared to me, and he does exposed to a lot of different lenses from different brands. So let's give a Rod a nod first and to see what, if I wouldn't say all time favorite, but if I ask you, just out of nowhere, just give me one name or one lens, that pops off your head, that thing you think that, oh, it's a great lens.
Well, it's going to be very boring because we talked about it before, but it's the Olympus 12 to 40 2.8,
Ooh,
because it's a bit of a lump on an MFT camera, but it's
yep.
just sharp and bulletproof and reliable. And if you need to get good quality in any set of conditions without having to think about it, without
Yep.
having to worry about being in the right aperture, that's the lens. That's the
Not
lens
not
to
not
get the
not not
job done.
not this one, the
But
1245 f4.
I am actually thinking of getting that because the 12 to 40 is a bit big on my EM53.
Yeah.
But it seems silly getting the 12 to 45 when I've already got the 12 to 40.
That is true. That is true. I mean, I often get questioned about, like, oh, which one should I get? The f4 version or the f2.8 version? And I always say, like, if budget allows, and if you don't mind, just a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier, go for the 2.8, because you never know about lights and things like that. And if you do come to a slightly darker area, the 2.8 aperture does come in handy, so you can still lower your ISO and get a better quality images. But just when you mentioned about the EM5, and then so this is what it looks like, and oh, there we go. So it's quite small, when you put
Yeah.
an F4 on the EM5 or the OM5, which is basically the same shape and form. So it's kind of like a perfect fit for it. And so that is actually a lens that pops straight out. Wow, that's actually pretty a big statement from you. So I would have thought that you would say something like a full frame or one of those like masterpieces in the past, like a Noctilux or something from Leica.
Well, firstly, I haven't used many Leica lenses, and it depends on the kind of context of the question. If you're talking about lenses you can just depend on every
Yeah.
single time,
Yeah.
that would be it. If you're talking about lenses with a very particular character,
Yeah.
that's different. But these aren't lenses you can use all day and every day. These aren't lenses you'd pick up for every shoot, are they? But if you were
Okay.
going to mention one, I think I might mention the Argus 25.95.
Ooh, right. That's the Laowa lens, right?
Yep. And also like a Summilux 28.
Oh
It's
yes, yes.
it's an F2, isn't it? The Summilux.
No,
That's
Summicron's F2.
Summicron. Yeah,
Summilux is
yeah,
1.4. Yeah.
yeah. They wouldn't let me have the 1.4. So the Summicrons, I think they're nice size. That
Yeah.
28 F2, just a nice lens. And it's one of those lenses where you get a different look depending on how you use it. If you use it
That is
wide open, you get a very, very particular sort of look.
Yes, indeed,
but you
indeed.
can always stop it down and get a regular look.
Absolutely. And just now we have slightly more people coming in now. And first of all, welcome everybody and joining us. Today we are going to have a chat about lenses. So you can all chip in and tell us why and what, first of all, what lens or lenses that you that are your favorites of all time, and also tell us the reasons why you think they are. It's not necessarily need to be a Michael Four Third. It can be any format, any brands that you have experienced before, any camera that you used with those lenses before, and we would like to hear from you because like I said, we all learning. We know that there's so many lenses out in the world now. Literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands and thousands of them. So we can only talk a few, and then so with you guys, hopefully we learn a few more as well. And you never know, maybe one of those lenses I've never heard of, and I'm gonna check it out after you mention it. So that could be quite interesting.
Well, Jimmy, I've been doing some trading since the last time we had
Oh
one of
yeah,
these chats,
okay.
and so two cameras have gone, and six lenses,
Oh, big
and
purchase. Sounds like a big purchase.
well, let's see, and possibly another camera and two more lenses today if the courier arrives. So
Right.
quite a bit of clearing out. Um, so I did what I do periodically. I look in the drawers and think, uh, when's the last time I used it, and when's the
Yep.
next time going to be?
Yep.
And you just have to be honest and say, I love it. I loved it enough to buy it, but I don't use it. So off it goes.
It's a dangerous game as a photographer. When I have too many lenses and cameras here, but like
Yeah,
very often, if I do sell something and 2 3 months later, I will regret it. I
yeah,
should have
yeah,
kept it.
yeah. I think the thing you've got to ask yourself is, you get given a price for a bit of used kit from one of
Yep.
these used camera specialists, and
Yep.
you have to look at that price and say, if you saw your gear on
Yep.
sale at that price, would you
Yep.
buy it? And you probably would. So you've got to think, well, it's some money I wouldn't have had, but then it's a decent bit of kit. You've got to try and balance it.
Right. So
So
so what so what have you trade up?
well, the cameras that went, Lumix G9,
You got a Lumix G9.
I got rid of it,
Oh, you got rid of it. Right. 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 Okay.
um,
Oh, you might
because
you might upset some people here today.
I know, excellent camera in every respect, except that my particular style of editing often means dragging out a very great deal of shadow detail,
Right.
and it's got this thing I've talked about before, where quite at random, often with backlit subjects, the very dark shadows
Yep.
just go magenta. And
Mm.
I just can't get along with when it happens and then thinking it might happen. And then you start looking at all your images and you think, oh, the shadow's a bit magenta there. And you kind of get that doubt. And it's
Right.
since I swapped over to an EM1 Mark III, and I
Yep.
just didn't need the G9 anymore. That's the same job. So that's gone.
Okay. Okay.
And the other one was my EP7.
You got rid of the
Love
GP7. You love that
E
camera.
I know, but it's just the viewfinder.
Right.
It's
Right.
just
Fair enough.
too many times. I
Yep.
thought, ah. And the other thing was that camera only makes sense with the 14 to 42 pancake zoom.
Yep.
And the more I used it, the more I thought, do you know, every time I use this lens, I
Yep.
wish I'd used something a little bit better.
Okay.
So then
Right.
I thought, no, they've got to go. They've
Okay.
got to go.
So
So,
review. What have you got now? Or what you're
um,
intending to get?
well, this might alarm you. But because I do a bit of work for a Canon magazine, as you know, so I
Okay.
got that. All right.
Oh, the R8. Right.
So it's interesting because it's been kind of characterized as a beginner camera, but I don't think that's quite fair. I see it's like an EOS R6 II
Right.
in an EOS RP body, and the RP and the R8 they're actually quite nicely designed. But anyway,
Mm.
it's I think it's just a nice balance of performance and affordability.
Right.
I can't justify an R6 II, so
Okay.
I think they're a bit steep.
Yeah,
Um,
they certainly are. And
for what they are.
because now you got a Canon, we could kick you out now here.
Yeah, no, you can't though. Because I've still got more Olympus cameras than I have Canons, so you can't. You can't.
I'm just joking, right? And so we have a few more people turning in and tuning in, and also revealing their favorite lenses. Quite a few of you actually, actually, it's got a variety here. Quite a few of you say about 12 to 100, and I can see 40 to 150, both the 2.8 and the f4. And I also see some Panasonic lenses too, some nominated 12 to 60 and the 100 to 400, which is the big long zoom lens. And oh wow, okay, that's an interesting one. Stephanie, I think, and then Mamiya KL65 f4 on the Mamiya R. I can't even read now. I need to go in a bit. RB67.
I can't even see your comment there. Maybe
Oh.
my thing hasn't updated. Perhaps you're looking at a different chat window,
Yeah.
Jimmy.
Okay. Well, mine just popped up, so I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, so it's quite interesting, a variety thing. So continuing, and now we've got more people joining in now. If you're listening, what is your favorite lens and why? And because we want to hear why, that might give us some idea that maybe will make me go and explore these lenses a little bit more to see whether they worth me making a video out of it as well. So you talked about your favorite lens, which is straight out is the 12 to 40 2.8 Pro. That's like first thing you said, and then let's go a little bit deeper now. Because as a photographer, quite often that we are looking at not about technical perfections. Like how sharp it is, how contrasted it is, and how much detail it can resolve in any given aperture setting. But sometimes it's about the aesthetic, which is what you said about the look, the character of the lens. And so when it comes to character, do you have like a lens that would suddenly come out and say, oh yeah, I remember that look, that really kind of give me a little bit of a oomph.
It's been my experience. Anything with character is expensive, which tends to put it on my realm. You often find it, I think, in unexpected places. Back in the early days of Fujifilm APS-C cameras, there was what seemed like a very plasticky, oh gosh, no, what was it? 16 to 50 zoom.
Okay.
And you wouldn't expect much of it. Had a plastic rear mount, and it didn't cost very much. It was actually really good. Really good little lens. Better, dare I say, if there's no Fujifilm fans watching this, better than the much more expensive 18 to 55 f2.8 to 4, which has always disappointed me a bit. But yeah, sometimes a cheaper lens has, and it's not just about the look; it's what it's like to use as well, I think. Because if you like using it, you're going to take it out more, and you're going to be more creative, I think.
Just like your favorite pair of shoes, right? If they're comfortable, they just wear the same thing all the time, despite others may be more expensive, like looks better. It happens to everybody. And like similar to photographer as well, like a certain camera, sometimes it just fits better. You feel better with it. You like you operate better. You just somehow, for some reason, just keep on picking the same camera up. Whether you have 10 cameras to choose from, you always pick that one up. And that's often the case. And so that's interesting. A kit lens, and that actually drew your attention. That's cool.
There's another. I've got another one. You got me started now. I went on a trip a few years ago with the Nikon D50-600. So that's like a little DSLR with a flip out rear screen. And I took with me, there were two retracting lenses to have for the trip. It was the regular 18 to 55, which is quite dinky and small. But there's also a 10 to 20, f4 to 5.6.
Okay.
Quite cheap lens, not particularly good, but very small, very light, and just a joy to use. And if it wasn't that sharp at the corners, I didn't worry so much, because it's just a nice little lens for that camera.
Then again, like we often talk about, because I understand from where you're coming from, because especially you write reviews on lenses as well as I do, and we always talk about the edge performances. But like it really depending on how, what sort of subject you use, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
if you shoot a portrait, it doesn't really matter about what the edge
No.
performance is, because you most likely you're going to focus on the subject, which is dead on centers, and sometimes maybe a little bit off, but it's rarely going to be really
Yeah.
on the edge of the frame, where the softest bit is. So if you shoot portrait, it's never going to be a problem. And I mean, unless you are using those lenses for landscape, which you do require edge to edge sharpness, then that's a different story.
But then I think we do really stupid stuff to check the sharpness. We look at it and think, oh, wonder if that's sharp, and we just
Yeah.
keep zooming in until we
Yep.
can say, oh, it's not quite sharp. But you say like a 200% on a
Yeah.
20 megapixel image. What are you even thinking? You can see it because you're looking for it and you've done what's necessary to magnify it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
in any
But
practical set of circumstances, you're not going
you,
to see it.
you know what? I think we're all guilty of it. Like
Oh yeah, yeah,
when we go to DP Review website, they have this little comparison chart, so you can actually zoom into pixel levels and look at like the
yeah,
comparing different
yeah.
lenses or different cameras. Like as much as I hate to say, I hate pixel peeping, but you're just curious. You just want to jump straight into it to see what result they get, and then you're often starting to compare and say, oh wow, that's better. The other, like we all do that.
Do you think we're all just a little bit insecure about our purchases?
No, not really. No,
And
I don't think so.
that's just me.
Maybe just to justify to our other half. Oh, I just spend that
Yeah,
money. Like why? Oh yeah, because it's better.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, right. Just to give you one lens that one of my favorites. I would say maybe one of my all-time favorites in all the lenses that I've used before, and I have now adapted to digital use. It's actually an old SLR lens. I don't know if you can see this.
I can see. Yeah. Oh,
So this is
the 85 1.2.
yeah. So this is a rare beast. This is the original L lens, the 85 1.2 from Canon, and this used to be on the A1 film camera.
Incredible.
It by today's standard is not sharp at all. Especially when you shoot wide open 1.2. This thing is really soft. And but just look at it. The size of the front element is just crazy. It almost can go straight through, and
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. But it's a very exciting lens, and I do like the character of this lens, and I did actually get the successor of this one, which is the EOS version, the EF version,
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
SLR. I had the Mark II. I didn't have the Mark One because the Mark One was incredibly slow to focus. So I got the
Yeah.
Mark II, and I sold it. I sold the SLR version, the EF version, and I kept the FD version because simply because I can still adapt this to digital cameras via an adapter because it's a manual lens. And so I have no problem with that. While the EF version is harder because it's everything is driven by electronics. So like if there's no connections to the camera, you can't reuse it on any other format. So it's going to be a bit tricky unless you still use a Canon SLRs or or SLR or whatever, the latest mirrorless camera via an adapter.
So I've actually got a technical question for you there, Jimmy. If you mount
Yep.
a lens like that via a dumb adapter with no connections,
Yep.
does your focus by wire stop working? So I know that won't have focus by wire, but if you were using your EF lens, which I presume had a focus by wire system, if the lens has no power from the body, does the focus stop working?
Yep. It stops.
See, now I'm going to steal your idea then, because that sounds like blog post to me.
Right,
because any modern lens you can't mount via a dumb adapter because you won't be able to focus it, because even the manual focus won't have power.
That's correct, because a lot of the modern SLR lenses they are drive by wire, and they need power to actually do the focusing. There are some older Nikon lenses, especially the early version of the SLR lenses. They are actually physical, mechanical, driven. So
Yeah,
those are still fine. But if you go
yeah.
for the later ones, where they are all fully electronics, and those are the one to avoid if you want to adapt to any other modern lenses,
That's why you can never
modern
put.
camera.
That's why you can never put a Nikon AFS lens on a Sony body. Not because you can't get an adapter, but because you wouldn't be able to focus it.
No, and
For exa- as an
I
example.
Yeah, I did a lot of research when I first got into mirrorless cameras, and because I wanted to adapt to a lot of my older lenses, and I found, there are so many limitations there. There were some adapters that basically will allow you to have electronic pass through, so will allow you to actually use the
Okay.
AF or manual focus because you pass through the power. But those adapters were fairly expensive to start with,
Yeah.
yeah, you can almost forget about AF because even though it claims
Yeah.
it works, but they are very very slow. Um, yeah, so I don't know, So then I stopped. That's one of the reasons why I sold all my Canon lenses because I had no use of
Right.
them because I can't reuse them with any of my mirrorless system now, unless I stick with Canon, get the Canon adapter, then I can reuse them again. And but as many of you know that I've exited the Canon cam, and then so I moved on quite a bit now. So that's why. But this is still the one lens I kept.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
one of my colleagues did wedding photography at
yeah.
weekends. He had the EF 85 1.2, and he remarked how slow it was, and he felt that the quality was a bit lacking wide open. But
Mm,
then he went over to the newer 85 1.4, and he
yep.
said, "I was feeling it's fast, it's sharp, but something's gone, something's been lost
Yes. Yeah.
between the old 1.2." And
It's the character.
I'm not talking
Yep.
about half a stop of light.
Yep.
All the
Yep.
things he felt were imperfections,
Yep.
he kind of missed having because they're part of the look.
It is. I mean, like I said, this guy here. If I shoot a 1.2, it's soft. You can look at it.
Yeah,
Like, oh, this is absolutely horrible lens nowadays. If you if you do a review on this lens in today's standard, it would say this is a crap lens, probably worse than some of the Chinese lenses. And then, but it costs a lot more.
yeah, of
But
course.
the thing is, this guy does have some magical rendering. Like the
Yeah,
actual character of the lens, especially the outer focus area. It just looks incredible. I can't use the word to describe. It's not kind of painting, like, I wouldn't say creamy, but it's just something about it, and it's really makes your subject pop a little bit, but not over exaggerating like some of the modern fast lenses. And so it is weird to describe it. And I had used this lens on Olympus, but obviously because it's 85 and it got two times crop factor, this guy suddenly become 170. So it's quite a long lens if you start putting on a micro four third camera body. And also it's incredibly heavy, this thing. So I think it's
yeah,
probably over a kilo, this lump, and then it's really really
yeah.
heavy. But you can see that I do have a micro four third mount here, so I did adapt to my OM1 sometimes to take portraits. So we got a few more people, and actually starting. Oh, quite a few people talk about stylus, the old stylus cameras. Okay, I have
I'm trying to remember those.
yeah, I have limited experience in stylus cameras, so I'm not entirely sure.
Aren't those
The look of them.
was that the American term for the compacts, or have I got
Yeah,
that wrong?
I think the stylus cameras. I think they were the compact cameras or the bridge cameras.
Yeah,
If some so is the Jason and also Ton, I think both of you mentioned about the stylus, and then
yeah,
you can let us know about exactly what they are, and they'll be quite good. And GEF, and I love using my old cow size Jenner and the 58f2 on the M1. Wow, okay. Okay, that's definitely old vintage lens you're talking about there, especially cow size
yeah,
Jenner. That you talk about the era of 1960s, right? I think there's quite an old
yeah,
lens. I do have some old cow size lenses, and they do actually all give me some unique looks. And but when I say unique, it's probably very common back in the days, because that's the design of the lens, and a lot of the lenses actually look similar back in that era. And if you look at some of the older 1960 Leica lenses and even Japanese lenses, Nikko, or even older Canon lenses, the rangefinder lenses, you will find the drawers are fairly similar. And like I'm not an ultra expert in vintage lenses, but I do have a fair amount of them. I do use them, and I can
Yeah.
kind of let you know that I would say that every decade or so, the look and feel of the character seems to change every 10 years. That's how I see. The 90s has a certain look, then the 80s has a certain look, and then the 2000s has a certain look. Now we're into the obviously, like another look again. So all the lenses that are released like since 2020, you find them, a lot of them are slightly different to the one that you see in the 2000s, and also and also before that in the 90s and the 80s.
I think at the moment there's a taste for very hard edge, very hard edge look, very contrasty, detailed look
Yes.
to fine detail, high contrast, clarity,
Yep.
which I think you can look at and you can think, oh, that must be better than the old lenses, which were lower contrast and softer. But I don't think it's quite as straightforward as that, because you don't
Yeah.
always want if a modern lens can give you a very kind of brittle look
Yes.
that's quite harsh.
It's ones and zeros, right? They're designed for digital because they
Yeah,
want to optimize for sensors and how the sensor can behave, and they want everything to look sharp. And I guess, you know, from an edit and from an editor's point of view, you can always de-sharpen it and put like artificial grains in it to
yeah.
soften it. So it's better to give you a sharper and more detailed image to start with, so you can work backward. I guess
Well,
that's the mentality. Mentality. They want to push the limit, and especially now the resolutions of the imaging sensors are getting higher and higher. So they want to make sure the lens design can get to that sort of resolving detail level.
I think it's I think what kind of brought it home to me was I bought a used D800, which Nikon D800, which you would think you get that for the resolution, and because I'm quite cheap, I got a Nikon AFS. I always get this wrong when I'm the camera. AFS 51.8,
Yeah. Oh, that's a good lens
and
though.
well, wide open.
Yep.
It's quite a bit corner shading. It's not that sharp,
Yep.
but then and that carries on down to about F4 or so.
Yep.
But then when I looked at my shots, I thought, well, I don't know. I didn't get this camera to equal something like a Sony A7R
Yep.
just to
Yep.
get that kind of like. I got this as a kind of more retro vintage kind of experience.
Mm.
And I do actually quite like the look of that lens. I didn't like it at first, but it has grown on me. It's got a
Yeah.
particular look, and it's nice to think that if you want that look,
Yep.
you open it up. If you don't, you close it down. So
Yeah.
you've. And the other thing I like about faster lenses, if you saw my Canon, I've got a 24 to 105 lens, which is an f4 to f7.1.
Yep.
So the aperture is not itself a problem. It's quite good at higher ISOs. But when you've got a maximum aperture of f7.1, you've only got about 3 aperture settings to choose from. You don't have a lot of it. You don't have a lot of exposure control. You have to do it all the shutter speed and ISO. Whereas
Yep.
for the prime lens, this Nikon lens, that'll go from f1.7 to f16 or f22. That's a huge range of apertures to
Yep.
play with if you need to adjust your shutter speed
Yep.
or get a different
Absolutely.
look.
Yeah.
So
Well, I can see John and Mark actually concur with you about the Nifty 50 about 51.8. Well, that's interesting.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
I think he's quite right. It's not clinically sharp. It's probably quite good at f5, 6, f8,
Yeah.
f11, but it just has a kind of organic look, which
Yeah. But
I'd
I
forgotten
have to ask
cameras can
the
have.
I have to ask the audience now, and then that do you prefer a very clinically sharp a lens or a lens with characters, you know. And so we talk a little bit about characters, and I hope that you guys understand exactly what we're referring to. It's more to do with the out of focus area, how the lens render an image, because they all have a slightly different kind of look, especially apparent when you shoot a wide open, like, you know, whether it's 1.4 f2, you know, have a little bit of subject separation. That's when you really see the character of the lens. When you do stop down, it's very hard to see sometimes, because, you know, everything's in focus. It's quite hard to actually tell the differences. But as soon as you open up the aperture, and that's when you really see them. Yeah, just let us know whether you know, technical perfection of a lens is more important than the actual character, and we would like to hear from you as well. So this is one good reasons why I like Olympus lenses, and you know, I give you reasons why, because like you said about these prime lenses, I do like the Olympus prime lenses, and especially the latest crop of 1.2 pro lenses. So I have the 17, the 25, and the 45 1.2. They all have what they call the feather bokeh. I did review and compare the Olympus 45 1.2 Pro and so against the Panasonic Leica 42.5 1.2 Summilux, and what I found is that they're both great lenses. Don't get me wrong; they're both really good lenses there. But the Panasonic Leica is a bit sharp, maybe a bit too sharp for my liking. So it does make this subject pop out of the frame, you know, and it's really kind of interesting look. But I prefer this slightly softer, kind of more you know, an image that reminds me of the 90s and in the 2000s, you know, kind of slightly softer but not overly sharp. And it's still sharp if you really look at the pixel level, but it just how it draws the image, how it renders the out of focus area, it's just a little bit more smooth when instead of the very abrupt change, you know, from out of focus and focused.
Yeah.
This is what the Panasonic Leica 42.5 1.2 does, and then so for that, you know, I went for the Olympus version because it just, to me, it's just more pleasing when I shoot portrait. It just, you know, ever so slightly, just a bit more elegant. You know, I think
Yeah.
that will be the word. Yeah.
I did actually sell my 45 1.8 because much as I admire how small it is
Yeah.
and how cheap it is,
Yeah.
I just didn't much like the look.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Because I kind of like that too. Just, well, obviously because of the size, it's just so small.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think for me, the question of whether I like a sharp lens or a lens with character comes down to, am I doing this for work or am I doing it for myself?
Yep.
So for
Yep.
work, I will always pick something that is just like the 12 to 40, which you know is going to give you
Yep.
edge to edge sharpness under just about any conditions, however
Yep.
careless you are. But for my own stuff, my own work, I don't know, I'd choose something quite different. So my processing tends to be quite intense and quite
Yeah.
analog in its style. So I do like a kind of more organic look for my own images.
Yeah, and here's another lens that I'm just want to show you guys as well, and this is the Olympus 12 millimeters f2.
Yeah,
And
that's
this
just getting more and more expensive. That is, I keep looking at that. It's getting more and more pricey.
I think it's starting to have a cult following for some reasons, and
Yeah,
I have no idea why. And but I absolutely love this lens. And if I just want to take out the hood, because the hood is actually what makes it look bigger. But
yeah,
this is tiny.
yeah,
This is a 12 millimeter f2, and it's
yeah.
an amazing lens. Is this not sharp? Well, it's sharp in the center, but the edges are quite soft, especially when you shoot at
Right.
f2. You have to stop it down to f5.6 before you get anything like sharp edge to edge. And so a lot of people actually consider this as an expensive but not performing lens. And but recently, I think a lot of people actually starting to like this to put on the slightly more compact bodies, like the
Yeah,
EM10 or the EM5 or maybe even the Pen
yeah,
series, because it's small. It's really small. It's 12, which is wide, and then and I think a lot of people like the look of it as well. You know, when you put on the actual official hood, which uh, it's an expensive accessories because it doesn't come with the hood. You have to buy it, and this hood will cost you about 60 quid. So it's actually quite an expensive accessory, but it does make it look kind of very interesting. And I would say that this is actually the best looking lens when you match it with the Pen F, and I often does as well when I do some thumbnail shots, and I think that it looks really really good. The reason I bring out this lens is not because of the looks. Well, it is the looks, but the looks for the images that it creates.
Yeah.
So it does actually give you a little bit of a like an old school 80s, kind of look as well. Especially the outer focus area. So if you obviously being a micro four third lens, being a 12 mil, so the depth of field is actually quite hard to get. So you have to get really close to the subject to get any sort of separations there. But when you do, you will see what I mean. The draw of the lens is actually quite interesting, and I really really love that, and especially when I do street photography, and the look creating from it, especially when you convert them into black and white, it will really give you that 1980s 1990s, almost like Martin Parr's images, and so it's like you kind of get that kind of old look to it. And if you process it right, if you any kind of color profile, then you can actually recreate some of those iconic Kodak Chrome images, and kind of give it a look. If you can get the color right as well, so you may get the color as well. So it's actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've got the 17 1.8, which doesn't look quite as nice, but I think the character is probably quite similar.
Yes,
You-
yes, it does. It does.
I think the two newest lenses I've got, the 2f4 ones, I think they're exactly as you would describe a modern digital lens. They are just sharp everywhere at every aperture, which is a great look if that's what you need. And I think for commercial work, particularly if you're not photographing people, they're just spot on.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say they had a great deal of character.
No, that's the trouble with modern lenses now. I mean, I'm not sure how many of you agreed, and because all the camera manufacturers now, lens designers now, they all like basically gunning for the optical perfection. They really want to see it, like as many lines they can resolve as possible, and get the sharpness right, get the contrast right, and all the CAD design actually, helps that as well in their design wise, and they all ended up with the similar kind of look because they're all going for the same kind of performance, and so I don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing, and because in the old days, obviously people always say lens is what give the cameras the characters and give the photographer the aesthetic, and that they want to create the images. Nowadays, if all the camera lenses somehow behave the same way, and then I find it really hard for a photographer to distinguish themselves or the images for that matter.
Yeah. I think it's not unrelated to the other world I work in, which is SEO and
Oh yes.
Google search and all the rest of it. And what happens in these areas is that professionals whose job it is, they can't measure everything. They can only measure some things, but then they make the few things they can measure their kind of whole career. And people come away with the idea that those are the only things that count. You can't measure the way a lens draws images. You can't measure its particular qualities, but you can measure lines per millimeter, and you can measure contrast and aberration. So this is all we're fed. So we've kind of got this tunnel vision, where the lenses we get are good at the things we can measure, but nobody knows what to do about the things we can't measure.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that made any sense.
It does. But I want to show you another lens as well. We won't talk about character now. This is another a character full lens.
Sorry, Jimmy, I just got to drop out for a second. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So this is another incredible lens, and that is just ridiculously small. And I just want to show you guys now, if you guys can see this lens. So this is Leica 35mm Summilux, and this is a lens that has a 1.4 aperture. So like, if to give you just like a comparison, and in terms of size, and here we go. So this is the latest Olympus OM system 12 to 45 f4 Pro lens, which is already very small and dinky. And now have a look at this. This is a 35 millimeters 1.4, and this is absolutely ridiculously small. And so I actually own this lens for many years. This is actually a lens that lived on my Leica M6 film cameras, because first of all I loved how it draws the image, and it's a fantastic lens for black and white film, which is whether it's going to be Ilford, HP, or any other XP film stocks. It's actually very cool. It's very low contrast, even though it's actually a slightly more modern version of this lens. And because if you look up the Leica history, this particular lens has about, I don't know, 4 or 5 different versions of it. This is probably the second generations, so it's slightly better coating and give you slightly more higher contrast images. However, it's still very low contrast by today's standard, especially shooting 1.4. But it's great for films, and I can guarantee that. And if you guys ever want to see some of these images, and I can post some on my Instagram so you can actually see them later. But it's just tiny, these things, you know. For a 1.4 35 millimeter, you can never get a lens this small. I know Voigtlander has made a copy of it, which is actually essentially the same shape and same size, but this is the original. And then and when I got it, I think it only cost me about 600-700 quid, and I know it's worth 3 times more now. So which I couldn't believe it, you know, because this really isn't something I would say special in a way, but it's special to me because it's how I think is great for film cameras. And you can try it on digital, but it won't give you any sort of high resolving power, especially in modern digital Leica cameras, which has 50-60 megapixel. I'm not entirely sure, but on the 20 megapixel 24 megapixel cameras, you can actually get some amazing result from this little thing here.
I think the only thing I'd say about modern digital Leicas is, I don't know whether it's the processing or the lenses, they are super contrasty.
They are, yes.
And it's a lot easier to add contrast in post than it is to take it away. So I think it's I
I'm not
think
entirely sure how. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure
it's almost
yeah, I'm not sure what Leica is doing these days. And you know, I love the lenses because how they draw the images.
yeah.
But like you said, I think in the last 10 years, all the latest lenses now, they're all becoming like any other manufacturers, if I'm being blunt, you know, and they're going for that perfection, you know, that give you the highest contrast ever, you know, possible. You know, the black is black, you know, and the line has to be really sharp. There's no fall off anywhere, so it's very clinical again. And even with Leica, I'm talking about, just to me, I think it's, you know, that's kind of taken what's special about the lenses, you know, the personalizations, the personal, you know, attachment to a certain character of the certain lens and focal length.
Yeah, I think it's probably the processing in the camera. I think that might be it, because you might know better, but I don't think Leica has redesigned its Summicrons and Summilux. I think they're much as they were, perhaps with some more electrical connectivity. I think it's probably the camera processing.
You think so? Because they
The
recently
Maestro processor.
they recently reissue or reintroduced or updated the Summilux 50 millimeters, and so it's got more aperture blades compared to the older one.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it has. So even those little things like aperture blade will definitely change certain characters of it. And so they may stick with the same optical formulas, but then if they change the aperture constructions, and that could affect the shape of the bokeh ball when you stop down, even like, you know, 1 or 2 stops. So that would really affect the draw or the look of the image. And it may not happen in the 1.4 when you shoot wide open, because that's the round circle, but as soon as you stop down, you know, the older Summicron does have some kind of star shapes, a look to it, and then so that means the newer one may have a slightly rounder look, and certainly that means that the outer focus area will look a little bit more smoother. But whether you think that look a lot, and that's entirely a preference that depending on photographers.
Well, if you used to watch DP Review TV, sun stars are a thing, aren't they? So maybe you do need prominent aperture blades. You can't win, can you? We all want something different.
it's really interesting. Now you mentioned Sunstar. I know how many of you really going for the perfect Sunstar when you shoot landscapes or cityscape. Especially people, photographers doing night cityscape photography, because the Sunstar can make or break some certain images, because when you have lights and stuff, and those star would it definitely looks something. I think personally, anyway.
Yeah, but you can't take them out once you've got them. You might be able to put them in with some clever bit of filtering, but if you decide afterwards you don't like them,
Yeah.
personally, I would rather have like a hazy orb around a light
Mm.
than a sun
Okay.
star. But I'm sure
That's
I'm sure
everybody.
there's no I'm sure there's an old coking filter for that.
Yeah, it's no the reason I want to talk about a little bit of Sunstar is because now you mentioned it. So, you know, our recent favorites, both you and I will agree, the Laowa 60 millimeters 6 millimeters ultra wide angle lens,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
fantastic, right?
yeah,
But interestingly, that particular lens, it has two versions: one cine version and one the photography version. The photography version is the one with the auto aperture, and the cine
yeah,
version is actually full manual, so there's no electronic
yeah.
contacts. The design between them two are supposed to be identical. However, when it comes to Sunstar, they behave completely differently. So
Do they?
the photography version actually give you these perfect Sunstar, that straight line coming out,
Yeah, yeah.
and the cine version does not. It's actually quite horrible by comparison.
Because I've only got the cine version. I find it slightly prone to flare. I've not
Yes,
noticed any sunstars.
yes.
So
You can
maybe
stop.
more internal reflection, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. But if you stop all the way down to f11 or something, and then you should be able to see the Sunstar. But perhaps because it's
Okay.
not. Yeah, this is what I mean, because it doesn't come out as a straight line to the edges, so it doesn't come out like a star. And while the photography version actually does, and it give you a much better look in terms of Sunstar, if people like the look of it, and that probably would be the version to go for.
Well, see, it never would have occurred to me to look for sunstars.
Yep.
But as soon as it becomes a thing, we all get very worried about it and think, oh, I've got to have that. I better Google best lenses for sunstars. Make sure
Yeah,
I've got one.
because like most people nowadays, yeah, whatever lenses they're gonna use, they know how often do you stop down the lens. I want to ask anybody who's listening right now, how often do you actually stop down the lens? Most of you will shoot wide open, right? If you got 1.2 lens, you shoot at 1.2. If you got 1.4, you shoot at 1.4. If you got 2.8, you shoot at 2.8. I know it's an unfair question, but a lot of people want to see the separation. You want to see the money well spent there. You want to see the character of the lens, which is totally true, and I don't blame you. And but you know, for those who do stop down the lens for their street photography, when they do the f8 stuff, and also when you do filming, and or even like slow exposure, when you have to stop down the lens, that's when you see all the Sunstar stuff. And yeah, let us know in the comment section, and or in the chat room, and whether Sunstar is particularly important for your photography. And Rod's already say no. Okay, and yeah, I'm just trying to see this lens, how the aperture look like, because they all look quite interesting, and some of these lenses when it comes to aperture. So this one here, I just want to see if I can show you on the camera. So this is the Ultralab 50mm 1.1. So trying to get it closer. So this has a relatively, I think there's quite a lot of aperture blade. You can see that it's probably got about 10 blades. That's why it's
Yeah,
relatively round. So wide open, obviously, circle. And you can see this shape will change. And this is the shape that we're talking about now. So when you stop down, when the shape changes, and that's when you're starting to see the draw of the lens, and starting to see some character from it. Sometimes we would refer to be busy bokeh or busy background, and because some can be quite abrupt and not very nice. Some can be a little bit smoother, and some will be in between. And just give you an experience and a comparison to my Canon 85 1.2, which only has a few aperture blade, hasn't got a lot. So just want to see if I can get that on for you guys to see. And nope. Okay. All right. So there you go. This is the 85. You can see the comparison now. This only got like 5 blades or 6 blades, and it's quite different. So to get the most out of this lens in terms of character, you will have to shoot a wide open. So as soon as you stop down, the bokeh will starting to look a bit weird, and then by today's standard, this is actually unacceptable. You know, we all talk about smooth and round bokeh balls, and this will not give you that as soon as you stop down to f2.8.
Some people like the hexagons, Jimmy. I'm telling you, they'll come back. The
Well,
hexagonal
yeah.
highlights, and if you shoot with the mirror lens, you get those lovely donuts. Whatever happened
Oh
to those?
yes,
We miss those.
the onion rings.
Oh yeah.
But you know, funny we're talking about this now, because if any of you, I guarantee that now, if you look on any movies that's been made in the last few years, you're starting to notice something, is that they're starting to use a lot more lenses with weird aperture blades. And then yeah, go out and go back and start watch some movies and look at some of those B-rolls when they shoot and the subjects, and look at the out of focus area. You will start seeing the bokeh balls are having weird shapes, whether it's going to be triangular, hexagonal, or some type of star shapes. So like, if you start paying attention to those, so you find it quite interesting to see them.
I think yeah, and there's a bit of a craze for anamorphic now, isn't it? Because of what it does to highlights
Yes.
and bokeh balls at the edge of the frame. But maybe in 5 years' time, we'll look back on all the films that were made 5 years ago and say, "Oh, that is so dated. That is dated so badly. Look at those bokeh balls. How
Yeah.
did people think that was all right?"
This is something about, like, you know, the interesting about photography or even filmmaking, because you know, like,
Yeah.
that's when you can tell the period of certain productions, and also like the photography,
Yeah.
because you can tell from the images, you know, the draw of the image, and to see that, oh, that's an old image, and that's an you know, an image or film from 10-15 years ago, because you can tell from the look, and
Yeah.
not necessarily, you know, how
Yeah.
they edited or scripting, but if you're looking at just a freeze frame, just by looking at the image, you can see, oh yeah, that's an older image, and it's not modern, because if you look at it, the film that we make today and compared to the film that make even like 10 years ago, they're totally different already.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
which is actually quite interesting. And even photography is the same thing. You know, if you look at images that are created in the last couple of years compared to photographers who make those images in, you know, in the 2000s, and even, you know, as frequent as 2000, you'll find them, they're quite different.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Go on. Yep.
does anyone think lenses are getting bigger?
Oh yes.
So I'm going to do a little quiz. So I'm going to see if I can hide where it says what this lens is. But this is a 10-year-old lens. And would you care to guess what it is from the size? If I bring it back more to me, you'll get a better idea of the size.
That's a 2470. That's my
No,
guess. That's my guess.
it's close. It's close.
Okay. Okay.
It's there isn't any suspense, is there? So I'll tell you. It's it's a Nikon 24 to 120 f4. Now I think
Oh.
if you I think Nikon makes a Z mount 24 to 120 f4 today, but it's a bit bigger than this is.
Yep. Yeah.
The only thing is, it might not be that big, but weighs an absolute flaming ton. So if I if I
Well,
put it on the J800, I can hardly lift it.
well, it's funny.
But
Funny you say
I
that.
think lenses are getting bigger.
They are, but if you look at even but it looks small though. I mean, I don't know why it weighs a
See,
ton, but it looks quite small.
that's not crazy for a full frame 24 to 120 f4, is it? It's not even a 24 to 105. This is
It's
120.
It's actually quite compact, because, you know, you compare to
Yeah.
the likes
Well,
of Olympus 12 to 100 f4. Oh right,
till you
extends.
do that, yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, because the Olympus 12 to 100 f4 is also fairly heavy as well, and it's quite big, and
Yeah.
but it's a great lens. I love the 12 to 100. I think some people mentioned it at the beginning of the chat
Yeah.
about the 12 to 100. It's a fantastic lens, and it's a very well-rounded lens that you can use for many things.
Yeah.
If you only just want to take one lens, and that kind of will suit most of the stuff that you want to do, the 12 to 100 f4 is certainly give you all of that, you know, the wide and the tele, and it gives you constant f4 aperture and with IS. So that means you can use the sinker IS with the body and the lens together, give you even greater stabilization. So it's perfect for photos and stills. So I think it's actually a really, really fantastic lens. But for me, I think the downside is two things: is the weight and also the size. It is a bit long and also definitely a bit heavy.
I think the thing for me is for one time when I was on the magazines rather than online about 5 or 10 years ago, there was a big passion for super zoom lenses.
Yep.
You know, like on APS-C that would be an 18 to 300, full frame might be a 28 to 300, whatever. But it slowly dawns on you
Yep.
that you're carrying around a big heavy lens all the time.
Yep.
For focal lengths, you only need some of the time.
Yep. Yep.
So I think I'm agreeing with you that I think I would love to use the 12 to 100, but having used it a handful of times, I'm very conscious this is a big lens.
Yep.
Because of a whole bunch of focal lengths I might use for one shot in 10 or one shot in 20.
Yeah.
I'd sooner take a smaller lens and a 70 to 150 f4.
Yeah. So instead, you know, like to having one lens to 12 to 100 f4 Pro, I actually now carry this. If I want lightweight solutions, I would carry the
12 to 45.
the 12 to 45 f4
Yeah.
and the 45 to 150 f4. Two lenses, actually still, you know, just about the same weight as the 12 to 100 f4 Pro.
Yeah.
And they're all similar weather seal, and it's a Pro lens optics, and especially this guy is really light, and then so I really like that I can just shove it into a tiny little bag there. But go back to your question. I now reminded me something about my Canon as well. You say that the lens is getting bigger and bigger, and you know this. If I just take out
that's not big. That's not big for an 85 1.2.
Well, if I how do I take it off the mount now? I'm just trying to take it out of the mount. There you go. Right, I'm taking it out of the mount now. So this is the original 85 to 85 1.2 L lens. So the second version of this, the EF version, the EF 85 1.2, is already 50% bigger and 30% heavier than this lens. And the latest RF version, the latest mirrorless version, they don't have a 1.2 anymore. It's a 1.4, but it's even bigger and heavier.
I think there is one. I think there is a 1.2.
Is there a 1.2 now?
I think there's an RF 1.2. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm already out of date from the Canon cam, so I'm not entirely sure. And
I think it comes on a trailer you can hitch to the back of your car. I'll check.
It's certainly getting bigger. That's for sure. You know, all the older SLR lenses, they are relatively compact by today's standard.
Yeah.
And all the modern AF lenses now, they are humongous. You know, they're just massive. Yeah. And I really don't understand why. I mean, unless you got a use for it, and I can't see myself using such a big heavy lenses, to be honest.
I think one possible explanation is the advantage of mirrorless was always put forward that you have this shorter flange to center distance, which means you can design much more efficient lenses. I'm not entirely sure, because that means the exit angle of the light rays must be even sharper, and that must cause issues with the center. But even putting that aside, I think a lot of mirrorless lenses are kind of disguised SLR lenses with just a big fat spacer on the back. Right. So I think Sigma's done that a few times with our lenses. They're basically the DSLR ones with a longer barrel just to get the extra flange distance. But I think it's the thing that mirrorless camera bodies were thicker because of the mirror, but the lenses were shorter because you already had the distance between the lens and the sensor. Anyway, who knows? I've got one more quiz for you.
Okay.
What do you think this weighs, this combination? Because I bet you it's about as much as two of your cameras.
So first of all, it's a D800, right? D800 with the 12 to 100.
It's 24 120 f4, yeah.
Yep. You already said this is about a kilo, right? That thing. So that the camera is D800s. That's probably
my hand's shaking.
It's about, I would say, 2.2 kilo.
Not quite. It's 1.7, but it still seems plenty to me. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's
So
certainly isn't light.
I don't think I'll be putting that on the gimbal anytime soon.
Well, by comparison, if you chuck the f4 lens on the OM5 camera, for instance, and then the combination, even the whole combination, is still less than a kilo.
Yeah, yeah,
And I mean, I guess this is the
yeah,
beauty of Micro Four Third, and so you know it is light, and then it is
yeah,
portable, and it's just small. So like you really, if you want really light solution for your photography, if you're going walkabout and things like that, you know, you if you don't want to lug around, you know, a heavy brick in your bag, and then so you can actually go for try out Micro Four Third. Doesn't mean that you have to stick with the system, but you can have it, you know, multiple system like many photographers do. I mean, I have different systems in my bag, and but you know, of course, Micro Four Third is my main kit. But sometimes, you know, if I do require situations where I need to be as light as possible, you know, Micro Four Third will be the only solutions I always take, and you know,
yeah.
it's nothing beats it.
Carl guessed at 2 kilos. Well, yeah, it was close. I must have weighed it with the lens cap off.
Oh, Zhao and also Jari has a suggestion. Samsung 300mm 6.3 ED CS. My God, that's a lot. That's a mouthful. That's a mirror lens, right? I think that's a mirror lens. The 6.3 fixed aperture lens usually is a mirror
Sounds
lens.
like, yeah, I think it must be. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have tried a few mirror lenses before. I do have a love and hate relationship with with mirror lenses. First, I mean, what I love about them is cheap because you know you can get a very long focal length for not much money, and but I hate them because they are very slow by comparison. A lot of the mirror lenses are f6.3 or f8 lenses, and then and somewhere in between. This really depending on your taste, and it's the onion rings bokeh that you mentioned, Rod, earlier, and so these kind of donut onion ring, whatever you call it, and
Donuts,
yeah,
I'd say.
they they look good in something, but not in some cases. But it really depends what sort of thing you're going for. It can look quite interesting. I can guarantee that if you go onto the beach and or get in a seaside and just shoot the mirror lens against the you know, all these shiny surfaces, you will get some
Yeah,
really interesting
yeah,
images or film, you know, because how they draw the outer focus area, and it will
yeah,
give you some really interesting look.
yeah. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big
No.
fan, I have to admit.
And George, what's your thoughts on an Olympus 100 1.8? Is that 100 1.8? Is that, oh, it must be one of those old lenses. I don't have experience on that lens, unfortunately, and so I can't really comment on that. Do you, Rod?
No, it's that definitely an old, because I didn't use Olympus Film SLR, so it's not one I'd be familiar with.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't have any experience in that particular lens. I do know that in the DSLR era and the Zuiko lenses, they do have some really fast prime lenses, and they all look really cool. I just don't have the time and or the budget to buy them because they were quite expensive, especially these sort of specialty 1.8 or f2 tele lenses, and they are quite expensive. So unfortunately, no. But if anyone has experience about the Olympus 100mm 1.8, please do help George out. And I'm not entirely sure, so sorry about that. Let's see, John here. Let's be clear. Many mirrorless lenses have a baffle on every lens rather than just one baffle of all the lenses on the DSLR bodies.
I'm not quite sure what that means, to be honest, John.
Yeah,
Not
elaborate
sure
a
what that
little bit.
means.
Elaborate a
Yeah,
little bit,
yeah.
and we can certainly have some conversation about that. So, oh, Stephanie had come back. My Mamiya RB in the towback. My doctor loves how my photography keeps my health. I like that. I like that. It's almost like one of those soldier training, right? You know, like carrying
Yeah,
a backpack
SAS.
full of stones and bricks, you know, just to go for a run.
Yeah, yeah. You've got to carry a wounded soldier on your back or an RB-67. They're probably about the same weight.
Yeah, it's certainly a humongous thing, right?
Yeah,
And
they are
who
amazing things.
who else still use some of these old vintage big cameras and To be honest, I mean, I occasionally I still do, but very rare these days. And because uh, yeah, I often find my shoulder hurting after, like, even a couple of meters of walk.
A couple of
And
meters.
yeah, that's definitely no good. I need to improve my health, but maybe I should do what Stephanie does. Yeah, just to carrying heavy cameras for a day or two, just keep walking and improve my health.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Carl. What do you think of the Panasonic Leica 202.8? Yes, I have used it, and it's fantastic. I love that lens, and even on the Olympus body, and it's really quick, really fast to focus. Got incredibly speed and operations, very smooth. In terms of images, and I would say that is once again because of it's a Leica thing, and it does give you the very punchy look if you that sort of thing that you're going for. Very contrasty, and I would say if you're just looking at an image, it will give you that pop. So if that's something that you like, and then the 202.8 would definitely serve you very, very well. And it doesn't have the kind of typical Olympus feather bokeh look, so you don't. If you're looking for really smooth transition, this may not be the lens. But overall, I wouldn't say it's a bad lens. It's actually a great lens. So you won't go wrong with these things. And if you are thinking about it, and I would suggest you to maybe rent one to try it. And because a lens this with this caliber and the price, you should you should actually try it before you buy it. And then it certainly it gives you a certain look. And I do like that lens a lot when I reviewed it. And unfortunately, I had to return it. I would have kept it if I could. And it's a great lens, especially that Olympus doesn't make a 200mm prime. And so it's a very special lens because Olympus only does a 300 f4, and the 40 to 150 2.8, so it's not quite a 200 2.8. So if you want something that more specific and want a fast aperture, I think that's probably the only option you can get on the Micro Four Third Land at the moment.
I think if you're shooting wildlife in sports, you probably do want that contrast and pop, don't you?
You do, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Especially shooting that that sort of distance, and from
Yeah.
so yeah, you probably want to have that pop to isolate the subject a little bit more. But yeah, again,
Because
different usage, I guess, for different people.
haze can be a bit of an issue, can't it? I mean,
Uh,
if wildlife probably not so much, but when you start getting into that kind of those focal lengths,
yeah.
you start to notice that atmospheric conditions can really mess you up
Right.
sometimes.
Right, Leon, just a quick message. Maybe it's just me, the volume from Jimmy is very soft. Well,
Right.
I did turn it down because Rod said that I
I'll,
was a bit too loud.
I'll go further away. I'll go
I,
further
I,
away.
I turn it up a little bit
Hello.
more. Hopefully, it's not too loud. And there we go. I'll turn it back up again. So hopefully, it's not too loud. So let me know if any clippings occur or anything that doesn't sound right. Let me know. I'll adjust accordingly. Okay. Mark has something to say here. Helios 44.2. Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
Helios. Oh, Russians. And
Eddie.
it's a great lens. I love that lens.
Yeah.
I do use the Helios back in the film days. I do occasionally use it on mirrorless cameras. It's a 44mm screw mount, I think it was, and so it's an interesting lens. Certainly got a very old 1970 looks to it, and it's cheap. The good thing is it's cheap, really, really cheap. And yeah, so if anyone hasn't tried it, you should give it a go because it's so cheap that you don't have to worry about it. Even if you lose it or just accidentally damage it, you can get another one for really dirt cheap. But they are great lenses and very functional lenses, and even more so, thinking about like these lenses were made back in the old Soviet Union era, back in the 1960s, 70s, and the 80s. And these lenses are kind of like a brick. You can literally use it as a weapon to kill someone. And sorry, I shouldn't say that, but and it's a very well built lens. Let's put it that way. And it works. It's a good functional lens.
Just to distract from the image I have of you whacking somebody with the lens, I'm going to ask George a question. He's got a Panasonic 35 to 100 2.8. So
Oh yeah,
George,
yep, yep.
do you switch off the stabilization on the lens if you use it on an Olympus body? Because that would always mess up the stabilization if I left it on. So I've used the 35 to 100 Panasonic, which has its own optical stabilization on Olympus bodies. I've always had to turn off the stabilization to get sharp shots because the camera body has its own stabilization. I think there is a bit of a conflict there. So
Oh,
if anyone's using that lens and wondering why it's not very sharp, try that.
good tips. Good tips. Okay, worth a try anyway. It's just a switch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And Mark came back from the Helio. Unique, lovely
Yes.
bokeh. Unique, lovely
Yeah.
bokeh. Right.
Yeah.
I think bokeh is a very personal thing, right? You know, everyone has their own preferences when it comes to bokeh quality. You know, as much as I would say, you know, oh, it looks creamy, it's really smooth, really nice, but everyone has their own opinion about, you know, and how what is a nice bokeh. And because very often when I come to my review and I say, oh yeah, the bokeh quality is really nice and very smooth, and while most of you agree and some of you say, no, it's not as good as this and that, you know, I totally respect that, because I know that, you know, we photographer can be, you know, very subjective. We look at things very differently, and you know, if certain look appeal to you, that's the best lens for you. But you know, when I review something, it's obviously based on how I experience it, how I think, based on my photography experience and how I usually like my images to look like, to and to grade those images, and to grade the characters of the lenses. And so yeah, there's no right or wrong answers here. So it's okay to talk about different characters of the lens, because it's always good to know from your experience as well, because that's how we learn more about different lenses and things that maybe we haven't even heard of. And so that's always good. George is saying that I love my Ollie 12 to 42.8 and the Penny 35 to 102.8. One thing I do like about the Penny 35 to 100 is tiny. I do like the size of it, because it's a very small zoom lens with a constant 2.8 aperture. By comparison, the Olympus 45 to 40 to 150 2.8, I love that lens. This is one of my workhorses, and that I would never let go. But by comparison, it's twice the size and probably 50% heavier. I know it's longer focal length, and but still, the 35 to 100 2.8 from Panasonic is very, very small. And I mean, I like the size of it.
The Panasonic 12 to 35 is very small as well.
Yes. Yes.
It's about the same size as the Olympus 12 to 45 f4. I don't think the performance is quite as good.
No,
but it's a very slick little lens.
It is. If you look at the side by side, I mean, I don't have one anymore, but I did test the Panasonic equivalents, the 12 to 35 and the 35 to 100 2.8 lenses. I think if you put them side by side, you will find that Olympus 2.8 lenses are definitely sharper and definitely perform better in most situations and across the 2.8 aperture range. In any focal length, but yeah, it's still a great lens. I mean, I'm only talking about academic figures and comparisons, and but you know, if you
very small,
yeah, it's very small. It's not that I would say like night and day difference, and you'll certainly be happy about those lenses. So if you size is what you're going for, then obviously Panasonic will have their size advantage because they are lighter and smaller. But if you wanted the kind of like the ultimate image quality, yeah, the Olympus will definitely win on that one. Carl, come back and ask you a question. Okay, the Panasonic 100 to 400 is similar, right?
So yeah, I haven't tried the 100 to 400. I'm aware that obviously that you can put Panasonic lenses on Olympus bodies and Olympus lenses on Panasonic bodies, but there are some little niggly inconsistencies sometimes around the focusing. So Panasonic lenses are designed for Panasonic's DFD focusing and aren't necessarily as quick on Olympus bodies. But the only thing I did find in particular with the 35 to 100 was that if I didn't turn off the optical stabilization on the lens, then I got worse results. So I was much better off turning it off on the lens and leaving it to the body to do the stabilization. I don't know about the 100 400 whether it's the same or not, but I think if you're using that lens on an Olympus body and it's not as sharp as you thought it'd be, I'd just say try that. But I'll leave that to somebody who actually has done it, like Carl, because I haven't. It's
Right.
interesting.
I have some experience in that lens, and in fact, I actually did a video on that. If you haven't seen that already, and but I was only testing this lens against the 200 2.8, so I didn't do a lens specific video on this particular lens, and but yes, I would switch off the lens OS and just use the body IBIS only. And or try vice versa. You can try two different modes, or switch off the IBIS
Yeah,
and use the lens IS only, not try and have them
yeah.
both on because they don't work, they don't communicate, and
No, no.
so you just have to switch off one of them and just try that. And also that because of the relatively slow aperture on this lens, and you may want to watch out for your camera shake and as well. Even though it has IBIS and stabilization, you may want to just bump up the ISO and use faster shutter speed to make sure that there's no camera shake there. I'm just trying to do some academic eliminations here, trying to eliminate any problem that would cause soft images or out of focus images. And but in terms of focusing speed, I can tell you that the Panasonic 100 to 400 doesn't actually focus as fast as the native Olympus version obviously on the Olympus body. I can tell you that it's actually slightly slower, and compared to the 200 millimeters 2.8 prime that we mentioned earlier, the Panasonic version, the 200 millimeter 2.8 prime actually focuses a lot quicker than the 100 to 400 Panasonic lens, and so this is just just to tell you that, and so yeah, worth a go. Just try it to do some setting changes and see which one works better, and just trying to do some trying to get some error eliminations there to see which one works best for your scenarios of shootings and your type of shooting. Because obviously, depending on what sort of thing you were doing, but if you're doing bird-in flights, that may be a little bit different, and so just have to have a go at it.
I have found Panasonic lenses to be a lot quicker on Panasonic bodies. I haven't used that particular lens or the 200 to be able to say, but with the others I've tried, they the AF works better because of the frequency of Panasonic's contrast AF is very high, which is where the speed comes from. Whereas Olympus's contrast AF refresh rate is probably quite slow by comparison. So Panasonic bodies, the later ones, have got up to about 240 FPS, and I don't know how often Olympus cameras do contrast AF sampling, but that's probably got something to do with it.
Yeah. Well, we have no idea, but very soon Panasonic's now moving to face detect now, right? So is that going to be changing
Well,
again?
we've no idea whether they will for MFT. So
Well, that's
full
that's well,
frame
that's on
maybe,
that's
but
on one of the wish lists, right? And okay, Mark, it's interesting. The Samyang plastic fantastic lenses for Sony E mounts were great, and I had the 75 1.8, and it was tiny and had character. I prefer it to the Sony's 85 1.8.
yeah,
I
there you
have
go.
I have not have many experiences with Samyang lenses actually, and I would like
No,
to
I
try
haven't.
them actually. I would like to try them, and so is the latest crop of Chinese lenses as well. The Viltrox lenses on Sony E mounts and Nikon's are apparently quite good. Speaking of Viltroxes, I'm gonna get some Viltrox lenses to review soon. So because I've got my ZFCs, now I've got new lenses to come in. So that that's great. So look out for those stuff as well. So I heard great things about all these third-party lenses. Actually, Samyang's being one of them, and I know that Viltrox is recently caused quite a buzz in the APS-C world and also the Nikon, especially Nikon world. On all the autofocus lenses, because as you know, the majority of the Chinese lenses are manual focus, and there are only a handful of lens manufacturers in China that are capable of doing really fast autofocus lenses, and Viltrox being one of the early adopters or the lens manufacturer to do AF, to implement AF in their lenses, and they are now into the third and fourth generation, so they are actually getting quite good in terms of the focusing performance. But this is what I've been told. I have not experienced them, but I will soon. So hopefully I can concur with all those findings. That will be really interesting. But I would love to hear from all of you as well. Now you mentioned Samyang. Do you prefer branded lenses, well, when I say branded, you mean like native lenses, like you stick with Canon lenses, or Olympus with Olympus lenses, Panasonic with Panasonic lenses, or you prefer third-party lenses, or what's your experiences in third-party lenses, like Sigma, for instance, Sigma, and all the other third-party manufacturers that we talked about, Lauer, Viltroxes, and all these. Like, we actually got a ton of manufacturers now, and whether you have a preference or whether you like them, you dislike them, and why. And that would be quite interesting to learn from you guys, or maybe we can do another talk about those. And because I know recently I saw Digital Camera World actually release an article about Chinese lenses, I think, and so that would be quite interesting to hear from you guys as well, whether what your experiences are, whether you enjoy using third-party lenses because why, whether it's budget, whether it's image quality, or maybe a bit of both, like bang for buck values, for instance. I can't I don't see a original Canon lens would cost $3,000 while a third-party lens would only cost you $1,000, so it's a third of the price. But does Canon $3,000 worth 3 times better image quality? I think that's kind of the argument we're talking about. So we'd like to hear from you whether you had similar kind of thoughts, and whether you have experience using all these third-party lenses, and do let us know. I think it'll be quite interesting to read about them.
I think for myself, it's difficult. I think with more and more zoom lenses, particularly relying on digital corrections, is becoming a little more problematic now and again to use third-party lenses. So, for example, if you use Lightroom, then Lightroom will support just about everybody and every lens, even some of the more offbeat independent lenses. But I tend to use Capture One, and they're a bit snobbish about cheaper lenses. So if you get a third party lens, so like I had 3 Sigma primes for my A7R2, which were fine in Lightroom, but in Capture One they took their time deciding to release lens profiles for those 3 lenses, and the 20mm in particularly definitely needed one. So I think there's kind of safety these days in getting manufacturers' own lenses, if only so that you get optical corrections in camera, and you're more likely to get better lens profile support in software. But there are lots of lenses that they simply don't make. So
No.
I think for that, the Chinese makers are just brilliant. I for a long time used a Lauer 9mm f2.8 on a Sony A6000. Sony doesn't make any lens like that.
No.
And it's just a
same
brilliant
as a
ultra wide lens. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think Lauer is my favorite in that respect, because this is a company that makes lenses. It's not whether they're as good, because the makers don't do them. If you want this kind of focal length, you're out of luck. Go to Lauer.
Well,
they'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, indeed. I think a lot of the third-party manufacturers, especially the one is slightly less known, for instance, and they tend to do something that is slightly different to what the current major manufacturers are offering. Instead of offering a 50, they'll offer 58 or 55 or 40, and so they're trying to be a little bit off the major focal length range that the major manufacturers are. So they're trying to give you a little bit alternative there. And but what I do like about a lot of these Chinese lenses are, and especially the likes of Lauer, is that they do try to design their lenses without any lens profile corrections, because they know they won't get the support from software.
No, they won't. Yeah, quite.
So that means that for them to stand out, they will really have to do the hard work by actually designing and making their lenses properly. And saying sounds a bit bad for the proper manufacturers, but they do relying a lot about software correction these days, unfortunately.
What I'd like to know is if I'll just take Lauer. It's not the only example. If Lauer can make a 6mm f2 fully corrected optically, why can't Olympus or Panasonic? Sorry, Jimmy. I'll say it very quietly. Hope you don't notice. I know the argument is going to be, well, of course, if you put in AF actuators, then you're going to have to reconfigure the optical layout. to make the autofocus work quickly
Yep.
and correctly,
Yep.
so that these third-party lenses have an advantage in terms of simplicity and of design. But even so, if Lau can make this lens and sell it for $600,
Yeah.
what's everybody else doing?
Yeah.
What it obviously it was possible, but nobody did it. It's a little
No.
bit annoying in some ways, I think.
It is. I mean, like, I know I often like joke about things when in my videos saying, and how could the Chinese manufacturer can make a lens for $50 or $60,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
like even in Laowa's cases, which is expensive in Chinese lenses categories.
they are. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And but
definitely.
still, when you compare them to the likes of the actual main lens manufacturers, like the likes of Canon, Nikon, or Olympus and Panasonic, Leica, and they are cheap, by comparison, and so but then you're starting to think about, so what's the margin in the profit margins in these big companies. I know that
I
there's
don't
brand
know. Yeah,
values, there's customer service, there's all kinds of things that could go
yeah,
into the
yeah,
costings,
yeah.
and things that's totally understand. Warranties, for instance, is good, and serviceability of the lenses. If something does go wrong, you have a local service center, so all these actually do contribute to the cost of the whole thing,
Yeah,
and which is totally understandable. And but then again, it gives you an argument. If I can buy a lens which is perfectly functional lens for, let's say, a fifth of the price, and then so even if it does break, which unless you really drop it, is unlikely, and it will last you for a few years. So if you do want to upgrade to something better, you have the budget to do so in the future. And then, so does that mean make more financial sense to actually go for a cheaper lens than going for the premium lens, the original branded lens, because of that reasons? So it does make a lot of photographer things, I think.
I think even if you take cost out of it, you these companies are making lenses that don't exist, even if they cost as much as
Mm,
the own brand equivalents. So Olympus and Panasonic don't make a 25 millimeter f 0.95.
no,
So it's not just about the cost. It's about lenses that don't exist
no,
until these third party makers do them. And they're
yep.
they're they're not just undercutting, they're creating lenses that did not exist before.
They are creating a niche themselves, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
if you actually look back in, like, let's say 25 years ago, 20 years ago even, and Sigma lenses obviously now becoming a bigger names, and also like
yeah.
becoming more mainstream. But if you think about the early days of Sigma, they did this exact same thing. Remember in the old days, and all these lenses that they created were also a little bit off, than the ordinary lenses. And when Canon had the 16 to 35 f2.8, they will bring out like a 14 to I don't know, 14 to 25, whatever, f2.8 or f3.5. So they
Mm.
do a little bit different focal length coverage and a slightly different aperture, or that slightly different focal length, and at the same time selling for cheaper, just trying to give people just a different alternative, if you don't want to go for the mainstream stuff. And I had a few of those early Sigma lenses. They weren't as good as nowadays, but still, it's
Mm.
quite a unique lens offering.
Yeah. If you had a DSLR full frame DSLR and you wanted a 12 to 24, it had to be Sigma because
Yep.
well, in fairness, Nikon made one, but it was absolutely colossal and quite expensive. I can't remember if Canon did. Canon later on did an 11 to something rather. But in any event, you're right that Sigma did make lenses that other people didn't. For my APS-C Nikon, I had a Sigma 18 to 35 f1.8.
Oh, that's a great
Um,
lens.
yeah, yeah, it is big. That's the only thing. But and they backed it up with I think there was a 50 to 100 f1.82 APS-C.
Yes. Yes.
So it's that kind of thing that makes you think, well, if this was possible, why did it take a company like Sigma to do it? Why couldn't I buy a Nikon AFS 18 to 35 1.8? Because I would have done, but they didn't make it. Sigma
Well,
did.
but then
So
but then
it's
again,
weird, isn't it?
but then again, if Nikon makes one, they probably charge you double the price.
Yeah, but even if you take the money angle out of it, I'm surprised that if such a thing is optically feasible and doable and not massively expensive, why they didn't do
That's true. That's true.
it.
And I guess, you know, like in the lens roadmap, in all the manufactured lens roadmap, they always stick with the kind of like a very traditional
Yeah,
coverage. You know, like they always gonna have the 24 to 70, the 70 to
yeah,
200. You know, they always have to have that kind of range, and they always maintaining that range and also updating those range. They don't make any. They don't defer from it. They're always making the same thing.
do you think they're just being deeply conservative?
I think so. I think it just the you know and I guess maybe in some ways it's also the reputation they have built over the years as well. They
Yeah,
know that, you know, a professional standard zoom is going to be 2470 regardless. So like that is what people know, 2470. So that has to be the
yeah,
range. You know, they might extend a little bit by 24 to 80, or make it slightly wider or narrower. I don't know. You know, just they do that, but they still always keeping that sort of range regardless. And the 70
yeah,
to 200 is always a standard kind of like a portrait coverage length for
yeah,
any photographer. So they're always keeping
yeah,
that 70 to 100 range regardless. If you look at all the older SLR, even back in the 70s and 80s, they always have that 20. I remember started off as 28 to 70 or 20, that's the first
yeah,
length, and then
yeah,
the 35 to 100 is always there.
yeah.
um yeah, it's weird.
It's yeah, 70 to 210, wasn't it? That
Yeah,
was a
70
big
to 210. Yeah, 70 to 210.
for film. Yeah, yeah,
um
and 28 to 70. We used to dream of a 24 millimeter zoom,
yeah, and then
but
it became
um,
a thing.
but but then the other thing is why are lenses getting slower? They're getting bigger and slower. How is that? Was never the plan, was it, with mirrorless?
Well, I think with mirrorless, well, I wouldn't say mirrorless, but I think in generally just about image processing and also the sensor advancements,
Yeah.
and people, you know, why would Canon generate all these f8 f11 lenses these days? Because they know they can push to ISO 10,000, 12,000, and you know, this is something that is literally impossible, you know,
Oh yeah.
15 years
Yeah.
ago.
I guess, but I guess I'm thinking of things like this R8, for example, comes with it's quite a short zoom. They wanted to make a compact kit lens, but it's a 24 to 50, which I don't
Yep,
mind. I can live with that. But it's an f4.5 to 6.3. So 10 years ago, if you made a kit lens that was any slower than f3.5 to 5.6, you'd
yep,
be laughed out of the business, wouldn't you? But now apparently
yeah.
it's all right to have a 2 times kit zoom,
Oh
which is
yeah,
half a stop or 2/3 of a stop slower than
yep.
lenses you would have bought 10 years ago. How did that happen?
I don't know. I recently got it. I recently got the ultra wide lens for my ZFC. You know, the new Nikkor 12 to
Yeah. Oh, you
35.
got that, did you? Yeah, I was interested in that. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
finally got that lens, and then yeah, it's a slow lens as well by today's standard. But heck, you know, this
It's
that's what
quick
they do
enough.
these
Yeah,
days.
yeah, yeah. How do you find the electric zooming? Does it annoy you, or is it all right?
No, it's actually much better than I thought. You know, it's not one of those.
Is it?
Yeah, I know it's driven by wire, but it's quite fluid.
Is it?
It's not one of those annoying kind of electronic zoom. It's almost like the old camcorder where you just twist a little bit and you hold it
Yeah,
to zoom in and out. It isn't. It
yeah.
actually feels like a normal zoom lens ring.
Oh, okay.
So
Because I'm not a big fan of power zooms, but
yeah, it's pretty good, but it still turns around. So if you can just keep
yeah,
spinning it if
yeah.
you want to. But it's because the throw is quite short, so you can do
So
zoom in and out fairly quickly without having to do a full turn.
right, right. Okay, that's good. That's interesting. So I think um, Nikon is really making some interesting lenses now for the smaller Z mount. No,
Yeah,
it's not
well,
smaller mount. No, for the DX format, Nikon
I
ZDX,
I'm quite keen
and
to have a look at
they're not very
the
dear.
no, and I'm actually quite keen to look at the one that they announced today, right? The 70 to 180 2.8, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so
yeah,
but the reason I'm keen to look at it is because that, you know, compared to the 70 to 200, which they sell for over 2 grand,
I
this
know, I know.
you're losing 20 millimeters. So 70 to 180 is only selling for 1400, which is still expensive, but it's a lot
Yeah,
cheaper than the slightly longer brother. So I don't know how
Yeah,
they compare between the longer one.
you've probably got some fairly substantial digital corrections going on. But I mean, I'm fine with that as long as the profiles
Is
work
there? Yes.
and my software uses them. That's fine. Doesn't bother me. But if you think back to DSLR days, say 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, you were buying the same set of lenses for a full frame Nikon or full frame Canon.
Yep.
The so-called Trinity lenses, your 24 to 70 would have been about 1,000.
Right.
So would your 70-200 f2.8, and even your 14 to 28, or no, 14 to 24, or 16 to 35 might have been $1,100, $1,200. That was about the
Mm.
price point. They do seem to have roughly doubled. And if
Yes.
and if
They
you and if you're a professional Canon user, then sell your car because you'll
Yep.
need to.
I remember
Unfortunately,
when I first started professionally with Canon, and back in the days, and I bought my three 2.8 zoom lenses, the 1635, 2470, and the 70-200 kind of cover everything that I needed for a wedding. And so even then, I have all these three lenses with the camera, which is the 5D at the time. So I would say that I will spend about $5,000. I just about cover everything that I needed, including a speed light. And
yeah,
you can't say the same thing today. If
no,
I need to
no,
buy an equivalent, and I need to get an R5, for instance, which is it's
yeah,
kind of, in terms of spec wise, in the level, is about the same as the 5D originally. An R5 would cost you a few grand already, $3,000, $3.5 grand. And then the lenses, oh my god, the 1635 2.8, the 2470, and the 70-200, they all over $2,000, and
yeah.
the lenses
It's
and the
so
camera is basically 10 grand, over 10 grand you have to spend.
rather more, I'd say. Yeah, yeah. It's got very expensive. And I know a lot of people who use these after using the DSLR version say the lenses are better. Mind you, I've only heard that from Canon and Nikon ambassadors, which may not count. Um, but they've got bigger, and the ones that haven't got slower have got much
Yeah,
more expensive.
yeah,
I just
ridiculous.
don't know how that happened. Yeah.
Mark,
Mark points out that that Nikon's not doing any 1.4s. That's a big hole, isn't it? I mean, the 1.8 lenses are good, and they're
yeah,
not stupidly expensive.
no,
But but if you're shooting professionally, 1.8 is not that tempting, really, is it?
no, not really.
And I don't know. I don't know if not many people have. Don't know if Mark ever got to use the Nikon Noctilux. Is it the Noctilux? The
No,
Noct. The Noct.
the knocked, yes.
The Noct. 8 grand and no AF,
Yeah,
and the size of a. I'm trying to think of something that isn't warlike now. After your crack about whacking
but
something with the lens,
it's big and
it's
heavy.
it's it's big. It's big and heavy. 8 grand for an f 0.5 lens. Come on, was it really that difficult to make? Um,
Yeah,
I can't believe it is. You could make a lens a lot cheaper that was good enough. Nobody expects an f1 or an f 0.5 lens to match a pro lens. You buy it for the character.
yes.
Um,
But
but
I guess they make those lenses as a showcase, right? I don't think they
yeah,
make
yeah,
it
but
for general
no,
people to buy them.
no, but there comes a point when you it's quite difficult to take seriously. I don't think many people did take the Noct very seriously for those reasons. It's
Yeah.
just a
Which
bit
is, I think,
ridiculous.
like, it would break my heart for, if if I'm the lens designer for that lens, because I put my soul into that lens, to create something special, and not many people actually use them properly.
The the Fujifilm 50 f1, the
Yeah,
photo length a little bit long. That wasn't that dear. It's a bit over 1,000, I think, or about 1,500. But it worked fine. It's a nice lens, very nice
yep,
lens.
yep.
So it can be done. I just think the Noct was not a good plan.
Well, the
Especially
same thing can be said for Leica's Noctilux, right? Like they're now over 10 grand now, almost 10 grand. I think
yeah,
the 50.95 and it
Mm,
is special. I have to say. I mean, I've used it
yeah,
and then I handled it. Is special. It's not a lens I would use it daily because of the size and the weight, and but it's a special lens. I know it's a set. They're showcase lens, and there are only a handful of people really make use of it on a daily basis. And Yeah, but it's still I guess in the photography world, there are not many these type of lenses. I know there are a few 0.95 lenses now from China, and but I can confidently say that, I mean, apart from a couple of them that I review, most of them would not have the same performance, wide open performance
right,
as these special
right,
lenses. And you do
yeah.
require a lot of engineering behind it, the use of special elements and also coatings to cope with all the diffractions and stuff like that. And so they are special, but you just have to pay for a cell kidney and buy one.
I think Leica might be a special case because I imagine a lot of this stuff is bought by collectors, not to be used.
Yeah, I mean that they're absolutely. I mean, I've seen a few people, my Leica friends, and they buy the Noctilux, but they rarely use them. They still use the
Yeah,
Summilux, and they always tell me, "Oh, the Summilux is good enough. They give it enough separations.
yeah.
It's already like really special already." Like, and I wouldn't be so confident carrying a 10 grand lens on my neck, when I'm walking about. And that 10 grand lens plus the 10 grand camera, so you got 20 grand. You got 20 grand on you. If you get mugged, you're gonna lose 20 grand.
That's the trouble.
Yeah,
That's the
that is
trouble.
certainly a trouble. But yeah, so it's interesting talk, and I know many of you got so many things to say, and I've see quite a few comments, and I'm sorry we can't get through all of them if we can't, but please do leave some comments in the comment section below when we finish the stream or when you rewatch this or something like that later on, and because we would like to hear from you. And also final couple of questions before we wrap up is that we kind of mentioned it already, but we would like to hear from you your experience in third-party lenses, and whether you prefer that or the original brand's versions, and they can be very different. We would like to hear from your reasons as well why you choose third-party lenses over the branded versions. And yeah, it's going to be interesting study for us as well, so maybe we can actually talk about it in the next chat, and to see the reasons from you guys and also from our own experiences. And because I do use a fair amount of third-party lenses myself, Laowa's being one of them, and but even in autofocus lenses back in my Canon days, I use Sigmas and stuff like that. I had my own reasons for that, and so I'd like to hear from yours as well. And yeah, so that's good to hear. And what about you, Rod? Anything last things to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I was just listening to what you're saying there. Not all branded lenses are great. The the good ones are good. They're not all good ones.
The good
So
ones are
I
good and also expensive.
they are. When you get into consumer lens territory, they you can get a lot of variation. You can get lenses which are adequate but no more, and you can get some that are really quite rough. And I don't know whether I ought to name any names at this point, but um, cheap branded lenses, there's generally a reason. Um, cheap cheap
Yes.
third party lenses, you can get quite a bargain. But cheap branded lenses, buyer beware. They're
Yeah.
they're either cheap because the specifications really quite basic, like my Nikon 50mm f1.8, or because they expect to sell a trillion.
Yeah.
Um, but especially consumer zooms, yes, that can go wrong.
Well,
Canon.
there's obvious
Oh,
reasons why they why they created the kit lenses or the consumer level lenses for cheap and also not performing is
yeah.
because they want to give you reasons to upgrade. What the thing
Yeah,
is, once you buy into the system, you've got a camera body already. If you want better
yeah,
quality,
yeah,
go for the pro versions or the more premium versions. Then you get a performance. And
yeah,
but yeah, we all know that these days we have choices, and choices are good for photographer. As a consumer, of course, more choices are better because we can look at alternatives. We can have a look at other budget options and choices, and hopefully one will suit your pocket and also your requirements if needed. And that's always good about having competitions, and that's exactly why we should support more smaller brands You know, I'm not trying to advertise them, but it is good to have
Yeah,
competitions
yeah.
to help out the smaller guys out there, so help them make better lenses and more choices in the future will only help us as photographers, because we the more choices we have in, especially in the lens department, you know, the more options when it comes to visualizations and all the other options, especially for like these days everything's so expensive, right? You know, and once you spend so much on the body, you know, maybe we can save a few bucks on some, you know, good lenses, may not be great lenses or top performing lenses from the major brands, and but you do have some options there, and still be good enough for majority of us, and even for me as a professional, you know, I don't need to use all the latest and the greatest gear to take my photos. If they suit my needs, you know, why do I need to pay 2 times the price for that? And
Yeah.
so that would be my final 2 words. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you very much, all you, for watching and also listening. And don't forget that to subscribe our channel and also subscribe the chat room here. We are usually on every Wednesday 3 p.m. London time. But if you do miss our live chat, and you can always stream back on demand via YouTube on the playlist, and also in America especially, you can use YouTube. I think YouTube Music as a podcast, so you can do that via the music app. So thank you very much for joining, and if you do like this podcast or chat room, and give us a thumb, and also say hopefully to see you guys next week, and we've got another topic. So don't forget to leave some comment below if you want to chat about something else, or to reply to something that we said about in today's chat room. Please do so, and we will definitely read them and also reply maybe in the next chat room. Okay, see you all very soon, and thanks Rod for once again joining us, and we shall see you all very, very soon. So bye for now.